Hi, my name's Kirsty Page, and in this recording, I'd like to talk to you all about verbs, which anybody who knows me will know is one of my favourite work subjects. In newsletter 3, I call verbs an easy win skill because if we have a more systematic approach and highlight the importance of verbs within our interactions and the language that we add with children, it can have really positive effects on all children, but can particularly support those children with language delay, language difficulties, and any children who are newer to English. So for those of you with Launchpad, Verbs has its own separate column in the yellow vocabulary section. But verbs are more important than just do children understand these verbs in order to access future literacy learning and literacy acquisition. Verbs play a really pivotal role in language development. So if we have a more systematic approach to verbs as a team and with our children, we of course strengthen this column of Launchpad, but we do lots of other positive things already. First of all, children have to understand verbs to understand what you're saying, just as much as they have to understand nouns and concepts. But generally in the world of education, we put a lot of effort into children knowing nouns. Do they know what things are called? And we notice that that children don't know sometimes what things are called. And we also put huge amounts of effort into children's understanding of concepts because we know that they have a lot of weight educationally and underpin a lot of future more formal learning. But what we often don't do is put the same emphasis on verbs. But children need to understand what verbs mean just as much as any other type of vocabulary. They also need to understand that sometimes we use verbs in the present tense and sometimes we use them in the future tense and sometimes we use them in the past tense. And that's quite complicated because sometimes it's regular rules and sometimes it's irregular rules. So I need to know that when you say, and away the witch flew, when we're reading Room on the Broom, that she was flying, but in the past, that she didn't have a really bad cold. And if I am saying, oh, you blew out the candles, then I'm talking about the verb to blow, but in the past tense. I am not talking about the colour of the candles. So again, they're really important for understanding. The other reason they're important is because verbs will be really pivotal around sentence formation. It's very difficult to put words together and to form a sentence without a verb at the centre of it. So by targeting verbs, we give children the building blocks they need, not just to support their understanding, but to also move further and further into sentence formation, which on Launchpad would be this green section. And also not just to use verbs themselves, but to begin to use verbs and to put more mature grammatical structures in place, if I can talk properly myself. So verbs are important. Verbs also play a pivotal role in safeguarding. If our children are going to disclose that something bad has happened, it's very, very difficult to tell somebody about it without verb vocabulary and also the ability to talk out of the here and now. But the good news about verbs is that we do work on verbs already. We will all add verbs as we talk to children. We will all use verbs within our language enrichment and the conversations we have with children. We've got everything we need. We don't need anything specific. To have a more systematic approach with verbs just means we have to prioritise verbs in the same way as we prioritise other things. Bring it to the forefront of my mind, but also bring it to the forefront of the mind of my team, and then begin to build on what we do already. And one of the easiest ways is just to prioritise talking more about what's happening. what am I doing as we're sharing the world together? What is the child doing? What's that child over there doing? So of course we will still name things, we will still describe things and talk about what things look like or feel like or sound like. That's about describing quality. But what we might do is shift our emphasis, so we begin to do more talking about activity. And of course, the amount of language that I add around that verb as I talk about activity will be dependent on who I'm talking to, how old they are, but also what their levels of receptive language and language processing are. But the first step is to just shift that and to do more of what we do already, but to do more of it. And also to then begin to think more specifically about verbs themselves. So to do this, we can look at our resources, individual resources, we can look at our areas, and we can say, right, okay, well, what are the verb opportunities with our Play-Doh? What are the verb opportunities with our home corner? What are the verb opportunities as we explore those resources outside? So that with the Play-Doh, we've got touch and hold, those very ever-present resources whenever you've got hands around, and feel. But we've got roll, and we've got twist, and we've got pull, and we've got press and poke and cut, and you name it. And in the home corner, we'll obviously have different things because the resources will lend themselves to different verbs. So prioritising talking about activity, starting to think specifically about the verb opportunities our environment already creates. And that will mean that we use those verbs more often, but then we can begin to do that final step. Within those areas, with those different verb opportunities, where do we need to pitch it for different children? Who needs us to add just very simple, familiar, early verbs and use those repetitively, maybe in the context of very short, simple phrases with gaps in between? Who has got quite strong language, so needs us to move them on by using those less familiar verbs, those other more specific ways of saying something that a child already can say, but to use a more specific verb? And which children are somewhere in the middle where they've got the basics, but we need to add more verbs, different verbs, other ways, but different ways of saying the same thing. So if I was outside and we were collecting leaves, and I'm thinking of this example now because it's autumn outside as I'm recording this, that we could, with a lot of children, or with young children, we could just be looking, and we could be finding, and we could be picking and putting them in a basket. But with some children, we might be searching, we might be discovering, we might be exploring. So that the activity is the same, but it creates lots of different verb opportunities at lots of different levels. And I will never want to use all of those opportunities all at the same time with one child. But the more we talk about this as a team and upskill ourselves, we realise verbs are important. We realise that there are lots of verb opportunities and they're more at the forefront of our mind than they were before. But we also begin to have that slightly more intricate skill, which is where I can take a step up with the language that I add. I can take a step back with the language that I add and stagger it to support my children to make progress at the level. Now, sometimes children will say a verb to me within a sentence or within a very short phrase, and I might want to accept it and repeat it back just as it was. Or I might want to just say something else in response to what they've said. Sometimes I might want to repeat it back, but model adult speech sounds because they've got some sound changes or sound omissions. But it might be that sometimes I want to repeat it back, but model how to make that verb a little bit better. And it might be that I model it back with the appropriate tense, because it might be that the child has told me I runned over there, which for that child's age might be completely age appropriate. So I just repeat that back and say, oh, you ran over there, did you? This is not rocket science, but it's really important for moving children on to their next steps. It might be that the child uses a verb and uses a verb well, but I accept it, but I repeat back a verb with a similar meaning, but which the child might not yet know or might have only just learned. So there's nothing wrong with that verb you've used, but here is another more specific or a slightly less familiar alternative. And the other thing that I might want to do is, when I notice that children use quite non-specific verbs such as do, put and got, I accept what the children have said, but I model it back with a more specific verb. So maybe if I am drawing with a child and a child says, I do my mom, I say, oh, I make some comment about the drawing, and I say, oh, you're drawing your mom. That's a really good drawing. I'm drawing whatever it is that I might be drawing. So there are lots of reasons to add verbs. There are lots of reasons why we can make verbs better, even once children start to use verbs themselves. But I go back to what I was saying at the beginning, and what everybody knows, I think, that verbs are really important, and to have a more systematic approach with them is quite easy to do. It's an easy win for your team and also for your children, but it is also really productive because it can shift a lot of children quite quickly onto their next steps, and it can be really beneficial at just generally improving levels of talk, the amount of talk, but also the quality of talk as well. Okay, well, thank you for your time. If you want to see more practical top tips, there are some in the newsletter if you're watching this through the newsletter. But if you want to watch these and other top tips as standalone resources, perhaps to share with your team and use as part of your CPD, then if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, then they will come into your stream and make them more accessible for you. Thank you for your time.